There's an awful lot of little things, and they're all little things that stack the deck in your favor. And I just made a quick little list of my own of things that I would want to check after I've bench run the model. I've bench run the model. Either before you bench run it or after it, but these are little things that seem insignificant, but they're worth every penny. Fuel jug. If you notice on my fuel, I have two filters, and they're not the kind of little filters that go in the airplane. They're Automotive. Automotive fuel filters. Now, what these do, you could buy these in any car parts store and they're cheap. The best ones are ceramic. They make them for motorcycles too. Paper. Now what these do is they filter out a lot of the things that happen to fuel. When fuel gets a little bit old, the castor oil tends to congeal. A lot of other things can happen. Dirt, dust can get into the fuel. It can, and because fuel is hydrous, it absorbs moisture. A lot of times it'll turn the castor oil into what looks like little white cotton. These filters get it out. So what this does is this stacks the deck in your favor before you ever even fly the plane. Having these little filters is a giant saving. Another little tip, worth its weight in gold. Every ship that I have a line reel, and they're all 5-inch large diameter line reels. I also have a dedicated handle for each model. The handle is always marked with one side up, bright paint, and on the bottom side a safety thong. Now, you would think that nobody in the world would even think about doing it any other way, but you do have people that have one set of lines and one handle for 10 different models. When I get to the point of bench trimming a plane, I want that set. The handle, the clips, the lines, all together. And that goes with that model. I don't mix and match. There's so much of a chance that when you use little reels to store lines, the little reels that lines come on, small reels, you kink the ends, and that's where they usually break. When you have a handle that's going to go on model A, model B, model C, the chance of getting it wrong, picking it up upside down, hooking it up crooked, astronomically higher than if you had one handle and lines for each model. And then on the side that goes to the plane, if you look at any of my models, here's the lines coming out of the wing, and here's the lines going out to the line. I'll always identify with a little piece of red wire which goes to which, or in the case of some people use nail polish or some other identifying way, but so they don't get hooked up backwards. Easiest thing in the world, you're flying that brand new model that you worked all winter on and everybody's excited and every one of your friends is there, and what happens? You hook these up backwards, and it's usually a disaster. Or you've stored lines on those little baby reels that lines come on, and right where they come in and out of the reel, you'll always see a kink. And it's just sad when somebody loses a model unnecessarily that way. Big line reels, the best insurance. Handle for each model. Another part of bench trimming is called knurls. Now what knurls are, a lot of manufacturers, even of the most expensive and best engines made, don't knurl every surface. Here's the motor, and this is a part of bench trimming that you do at the shop before you fly the model. The back face, where the prop is going to go up against, I would take an engraving tool, a file, roughen it up, make it as rough as possible. The surface of the prop, especially if it's a nylon or carbon prop, I want teeth there. I want it rough. An engraving tool is real good. Both sides. The washer or nose weight that goes up against that, I want knurls on that side. The side the nut goes on, you don't need knurls. So you usually wind up having a minimum of 4 surfaces. In the case of a spinner, you can have 6 or more. An extension unit, 8 or more. You want those surfaces knurled. You want them rough. If you look at a prop washer and you had a file a Dremel tool in, make a sunburst out of it. If you have an engraving tool, just make it as rough as possible, or both. Now, this isn't real obvious. Well, when it's obvious is when a prop comes loose. Either it'll flip backward, it'll kick back, loosen the prop and the motor will keep running, in which case it's dangerous. You could lose your eye, your face, your nose, and or the motor. Knurl surfaces allow that when you tighten it, these grip, they have teeth, and those surfaces grip together, especially if you're using a nylon or a carbon prop. This is absolutely critical not to have that surface smooth. Knurls are your friend, and they get put in at the shop before you ever fly the model or run the motor. Knurls are cheap insurance that you're not going to have a safety issue, a prop come loose, or just the inconvenience of having to take it all apart and retighten the prop at an inconvenient time. Now, it may sound funny. If you're a person that has a whole bunch of windy videos, you might have the video from our trip to Texas. Well, on that trip to Texas, we had a very funny thing happen. Funny if you're in the Michelin tire business. We were driving along from Houston to Dallas to go stay with Al Raby, and what happened? One of my tires, boom, blew out. Now you're thinking, well, what the heck's that got to do with a bench trimming video? Well, it's got a lot to do with it, because what I had done is not checked my tires before the trip and never realized they had 88,000 miles on them. The tires, the Michelin tires, are warranted for 75,000. So it means I had nobody to blame but myself. Well, I became an even bigger believer in the idea of replacement items. Now, that's just an example of in a car. A windshield wiper. These are replacement items. Windshield wipers. You don't replace one windshield wiper, you replace both of them. In the case of tires, yeah, well, sometimes you can replace 1 or 2. I wound up buying 4 tires at about $600, and it basically ate the budget for the whole trip. But here's the point. Here's how this relates into what we're doing. Knowing when something is going to wear out, you really don't wait for it to break. You replace it before it breaks. Here are some of the things that are very obvious. The cables that go through most handles. Very inexpensive part. The part takes a tremendous stress right at the end. All of the stress goes right into the end of that cable, no matter what kind of system you have, bar or no bar, or the traditional handle. That cable at the end of every season, or even better, at the beginning of a bench trimming. I'll explain why in a minute. When you bench trim a model, I would cut the cable out, replace a new cable. Seen at least 4 or 5 people that I know, highly skilled modelers, lose a plane early into it. Because what happened is they set this cable, and what happens, it wears right at that point where it exits. And now if you're flying X amount of gallons and you're putting a lot of wear and tear on it and you don't replace it, it's like that tire in Texas. It picks a very inconvenient time and place to break. A new handle cable is such cheap insurance, and the time to do it is when you're bench trimming the model. Because then you don't forget. You don't get to the field and say, oh, I don't want to do that, I want to fly today. Do that right on a bench. A new cable each time you bring out a new model. Good, cheap insurance. And these are all little things, but the combination of all these little things is you have a problem-free first flight on a plane, and or first day, and or first month, year, or forever. It's problem-free. Another thing, lines. How many, oh my God, this it's not even fair to start thinking about it. How many people have refused to purchase a new set of lines? I got a new model. I'll use last year's lines. Oh yeah, somebody stepped on them at the end of last year and I forgot to check that they're kinked or they're frayed or they're broken. Now this is something I know about, and I know really well, because last year I lost the Typhoon, one of my top 5 planes. I lost it because a line failed. And I realized it was my own fault. A new plane, you're bench trimming it. What a great time to get a new set of lines. What a great time to get a new cable and a handle. What a great time to replace things before they break. Think of them. Lines and handles are replacement items. And you replace them before they fail in service. So let's make up what I call some best choices. Best choices usually are, you usually have a scenario that you have to deal with. Let's make a couple of scenarios up that'll be easy. We've checked our center of gravity and we realize, uh-oh, this model is really nose heavy. That's where it should balance, and it balances way further forward than that. Now, we know what are some of the ways that we can get this model into its correct place of balance. Well, there are 2 possibilities when you have a seesaw. If you have a seesaw and this side falls down, the choices are, you can put more weight on this side, or you can take some weight off of the heavy side, or and to be perfectly honest, you can change the fulcrum point, but we can't really change the fulcrum point right now. But let's make a couple of scenarios up. Here's the scenario. The model's really nose heavy. Built this beautiful model, beautiful finish. It's nose heavy. We go to bench trim it, and now we're really disheartened by the fact that it is really nose heavy, and we got to get some of that weight out. What are the possibilities? What are the things we can do? You always start, when you're trying to change the center of gravity, you start as far from the fulcrum or the pivot point as possible. So in this case, the spinner is the single item that would be the easiest thing to change, and we could change it right at the field. Now a lot of times if you go and weigh up a bunch of manufacturers' spinners, you can have variations of an ounce and a half in some different brands of spinner. Let's just pretend you've now got the lighter or the lightest spinner you can put on the plane. It's on there, and now it's still nose heavy. Well, as we work our way back, what are some of the other things? Well, of course, the prop would be another choice. You could put a lighter prop on, but you still need the prop to fly the plane. The motor. Now, in a lot of cases, different brands of motors weigh dramatically different. As an example, a Fox or a Brodak 40 is a lot lighter than some of the more modern OS Max motors that are a little bit heavier, or some of the ones that are really heavy. So changing the motor is another possibility. The tank. See, we're working our way from as far away, we're working back toward the center of gravity. The tank. Now, I just went through on the Testarossa subscriber videos, going through 3 tanks, and the tanks weighed 72 grams, 52 grams, and 22 grams. So you can see there's 2 ounces of difference here. Well, by changing the weight of that tank, I'm dramatically changing the CG. Now, in the case of the lightest tanks possible are carbon fiber, expensive, may not be appropriate for what you're flying. But the mid-range tanks, of which there are many manufacturers, the plastic ones, Brodak's tanks, And then there's custom-made, relatively heavy-duty tanks. But balancing the model, this, if you change from a 22-gram tank to a 72-gram, you're not only taking 2 ounces off the model, you're taking it off in the front and getting that CG back to where it's more favorable, more in your favor. Now on some ships that have barrel mufflers, if you notice, some of the side exhaust engines have a big heavy muffler, typically 3, maybe even 4 ounces. Well, a lot of times you can use a tongue muffler. A lot of times you can vary the weight of the muffler. In the case of a tuned pipe model, well, of course you can buy the lighter of the brands of pipes. You can vary the vertical CG and the horizontal CG with the weight of that pipe. These are all things, and typically wheel pants add into this equation. But this is all stuff, basically everything except the back end of the tuned pipe that's in front of the CG, and it also is going to affect the vertical CG. So this is something you want to consider when you know a model's nose heavy. Before you even fly it, you'd like to get it back to where the designer put on the plans, and if you can't find that, the high point of the wing. That would always be a better choice. And in this case, this is the simplest thing of all. The choices are to always take weight off of the heavy side. Now what a lot of people do, and I used to do it to be honest, I'd say, the model doesn't balance. I'll just wrap solder all over the tail wheel. I'll glue lead here. I'll put clay on the rudder. Well, adding weight is not the best choice. The best choice is always to take the weight off the heavy side and take it from as far forward as possible and work your way back to the vertical CG. Then as everything else failed, if this whole thing fails, then go behind the CG and add a little bit of solder or clay or some material. But always, the best choice is always to take material off the heavy side. It is always a better choice, in my opinion, and that's the only choice that anybody should exercise.